This is Josh Beiser from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Alright everybody, we got a good Critical Thought for you today. So good I'm rubbing my hands in excitement, because I have an idea for another kind of video playlist for the channel here, and I'll reveal that in a few minutes. But for today's Critical Thought, we're going to be talking about Prison Architect and what Introversion did really well in terms of designing that game and what designers can learn from it. And this is something I've been thinking about since the game has gone through its whole early access period. And Prison Architect has kind of become the poster child for early access, and deservedly so. It's probably the most successful game and the most successful example of what early access can do in terms of charting and essentially watching a game grow from beginning to end. And Introversion certainly needed this one. The story goes that Prison Architect was originally going to be another one of the games they were working on, and while they were developing it, they just didn't enjoy it or they didn't like it, and they decided to switch over to this game and what would become their quote-unquote prison simulator. And the game was in early access for quite a long time, and one thing that we probably won't know unless they tell us is what was the original plan for Prison Architect and how was it changed thanks to the humongous success they got with the platform. Now, what makes Prison Architect and its design such a fascinating thing to look at is how the game was developed and its course over early access. When we look at games like Prison Architect, we can put this in a similar group to stuff like multi-system games. This is where a game is made up of multiple systems all interconnected to each other in a sense. Titles like Masters of Orion, XCOM, Crusader Kings, of course Dwarf Fortress would be an example. These are games that you have these different systems together that you really can't remove one without completely changing your game. If you take out the tactical layer in XCOM, you don't have XCOM anymore. You have something completely different. And what this kind of design does is that it makes it very hard to develop a game around multiple systems. Because the issue is you have 3 or 4 plus systems all working together, and that means it's very hard to tell how your game is coming along. Because you cannot tell what a game is just on one system. Just because you have the UI done or you have just being able to put buildings down doesn't tell you if your economy system works or if diplomacy is going on. And what this means is these titles typically don't come together until late in the development project. You know, once you are 56% of the way there and the basics of your systems are done and you can start to see this framework happening. In a traditional game, one that's built on a linear experience, it's a lot easier to chart that progress. If you say your game's going to have 10 levels and 5 of them are done, then you're 50% of the way there. But how do you tell when a game like AI Wars is done? Or Europa Universalis? How do you know when these games are done? There's no strict list of what's in these games, and this again makes it very difficult to design. On yesterday's Critical Thought, I talked about the issues that Clockwork Empires face and how it never seemed like the development was making steady progress. It felt again like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back kind of deal. And this goes back to the issue about understanding your core gameplay loop. Essentially the foundation of your game. What the player is going to be doing for hour, 3 hours, 30 hours, 80 hours, you name it. And it's very easy to define what a core gameplay loop is with traditional games. Doom, run around, shoot people. Mario, platforming. StarCraft, RTS play. But when we're building multiple systems on top of each other and interconnected, it becomes a lot harder. And where some games struggle and where some games have flourished. and it's time for a little game design quiz. And since this will probably be part of a post that will be cross-posted, I'm sure there are some people from Destructoid, Gamma Sutra, Now Loading, or I'm sorry, Movie Pile watching this. So, hello everyone. It's time to put on your game designer hat. Here's the little question for you. As I just mentioned over the last 5 minutes, Prison Architect's success had to do with its core gameplay loop and what you can see over the course of its, I want to say, at least 30 alphas. Again, time has no meaning for me in this case, so I don't remember exactly how it was. But the key to what Introversion did well with Prison Architect has to do with charting its progress and its core gameplay loop. So my question for you is, what was the secret to their success? And again, the core gameplay loop being the clue. So if you want to pause the video and think about this, feel free. I'm going to take a drink to give you at least a pseudo timer for it. Alright. The secret that Prison Architect and what Introversion did is very simple. They built the game one layer at a time. I know that may not sound like it makes too much sense, but hopefully over the next few minutes we'll be able to explain that. In Prison Architect, with each of its systems, the game essentially layers them on top of the core gameplay loop. What that meant is each system is not really designed interconnectively in the same sense in most games. Right now on this screenshot, you're looking at the UI for essentially the prison management system. This was developed pretty early in the game's alphas. I want to say before Alpha 10, but definitely by Alpha 15 when I started playing it. Now, this system was put in very early on, but when it was put in, that was it. They didn't decide to edit the entire regiment system or the prison management system at Alpha 25. What they did essentially, instead of building this as separate systems that all have to be connected, they built this in terms of layers. And from the Clockwork Empire's talk, I mentioned it, think of it as like a tower or a skyscraper. You're not going to build floor 5, half-ass it, and then once you get to floor 15 say, well, we better go back and finish floor 5. That wouldn't work. Think of it as, for people who understand cars, making sure that the frame of your car and your engine are working before you do anything else. Because those two elements are the heart of your car. It doesn't matter, the paint job or the suspension or the best parts you use, if your frame is twisted, rusted, there's holes in it, stuff like that. Just like how it doesn't matter what everything your car is if your engine doesn't work. And what Prison Architect did and what Introversion developed was build everything on top of the core gameplay loop. They got what they want in terms of the basic systems very early on in the game's development. In fact, when the very first alpha, if I remember right, was just literally you putting buildings up. That's it. There's no money system, there's no managing prisoners' needs, there's essentially no gameplay other than I click around, I put buildings up, and that's it. And it doesn't sound all that spectacular, but you have to realize is very early into the game's development, Introversion knew exactly what they wanted the player to do. They wanted them to put up these buildings, make sure that works, make sure the UI is stable, and get that all done before anything else. And what this led to was it gave them the freedom to build up. Each alpha, or every few alphas, new systems were introduced on top of one another. So once they got the buildings done, let's worry about power. Once power's done, let's worry about water. Once that's done, let's start adding in the people. And each layer is built on top of each other. And what makes this such a brilliantly simplistic concept is that it allows them to grow and expand this foundation without upsetting it. They know once their core foundation is done that everything at this layer is finished. They're not going to come back to it. There is no problems with it. This is all done. So let's say next month they add in another layer to it. Let's throw in, let's say, managing the prisoner's needs. Let's just picture that as this layer here. They're working on, they're designing it, and let's say things aren't working out with this. For whatever reason, let's say their original concept didn't work. And again, this is just hypothetical. What would, in most cases, if they were building this layer at the same time as they were building the UI, they would have a tough time of figuring out why this isn't working, because everything is being designed at the same time. So what they may have decided to do was, maybe it's a UI issue. Let's go back and redo the UI. But then what if that doesn't work? Well, now we have to tear it down, build it up again. And this is kind of the issue that happened with Clockwork Empire, sadly. That for every step they took forward, they kept redoing and going back over pre-existing design elements. The farming system got multiple iterations. How buildings function got changed over and over again. It never felt like it was a layered process. Again, it felt like we go up 3 floors, now we have to tear it back down, start over again. What Prison Architect did, and with this kind of a layered approach, was if this layer doesn't work, they know that everything below it does work, because everything was built, tested, iterated on, and refined. So that limits, or that narrows down, where their issues are coming from. And because of this layered approach, it makes it very much a systematic kind of game development. And you can see this, again, with how Prison Architect was. I hope at some point someone can just combine all the videos, like it's kind of like smash them together from Introversion, just going over what they did for each month of alpha, and you can chart this growth. And if you notice, over the course of the 30 alphas, the game doesn't change, in the sense that if we go back to this screenshot, what you see here is pretty much the same throughout all the alphas as time went on. New features were added, but in terms of its UI, in terms of its presentation, everything remains the same, or remains consistent. And what makes this work so well is, again, it affords them the ability to experiment without destroying what they already had. And you can see this in other multi-system titles, such as like Crusader Kings. And Paradox is a really good example of how this layering works. Each one of their expansions adds a new system on top of the pre-existing ones. In Crusader Kings 2, for instance, if I remember right, there was an expansion that added in the Crusades. And this throws in a new group of nations, new researchers to deal with, and a new group to talk to diplomacy-wise. What the expansion didn't do was change the systems before it. They will never introduce an expansion that completely guts their economy, or an expansion that will completely rebuild their diplomacy model. They could do that if they wanted to, but that would lead to more trouble. With this layered approach, it allows them to just keep adding and growing the game while being confident in the fact that what they had before will remain untouched. And with Prison Architect, and as another example, you can see this in what they're doing in Stonehearth, the developers of that. Looking at the development cycle, it took them quite a long time to get their core foundation done. The backbone, their engines, the art, the basics for building your buildings up and managing your Hearthlings. But that is all done. What they're doing now is expanding on that. And again, because of this layered approach, it affords them the ability to just keep adding on these different systems and seeing what works and what doesn't. And how this allows them to do this, that is the phone ringing, so I will pause for 1 second. And we're back. So with Stonehearth, with this layered approach, it basically allows them to know confidently that their basic systems are all meshing with their core gameplay loop. And from this point on, it all goes back to that. So a new system will still have to be connected to the core gameplay loop, but if it doesn't work, it's just a matter of removing that one system. And this is again why the layer approach works. If I'm here, for instance, I know that everything below it in terms of design is stable. It's set, it all works, there's no problem. If I add another system to it and this one is not working, I need to remove this one before I build anything else. Because if I don't, then all new systems will be built on the foundation of the one that I'm not sure about. And if there are any problems, it makes it much harder to figure out a solution. Because it's not just as simple as taking out one system if you have 3 or 4 of your other systems or mechanics that are relying on it. And again, this is where this idea of harmonizing game design comes in. Now, with that said, as I said at the start, this does present a few issues with Prison Architect and kind of this layered approach. And this was something that I talked with a friend about, I think a year and a half, 2 years ago, when we were talking about Prison Architect. I think this was, near the end of the early access. And that is, with this layered approach, you kind of run the risk of these systems not feeling completely connected. And I know that doesn't make much sense. I'm going to see if I can explain that further. The example we talked about was the wiring system in Prison Architect. For those of you who didn't play the game, one of the advanced systems they added in later into the alpha was the ability to actually create wiring around your prison. You can set up motion detectors, automatic doors, pressure plates that can turn things on and off, all in a way of adding automation. Now, this system, it kind of exists in a vacuum almost. It doesn't make the game better or worse, and in some cases you can just literally ignore it and nothing bad or good will happen to you. But it's kind of one of those things that's just there. When it comes to this layered approach, one of the things that you have to do is still make sure there is some measure of connectivity. System 7 should be connected to System 6 as System 5 and 4 and so on. And going back to what we said with harmonizing game design, everything should be working together. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this layered approach is even though these systems are built on top of each other, they still have to be connected in some sense. For instance, in Prison Architect, one of the later additions to the game was the ability to control the prisoner flow to your prison each day. You can say, I want more high risk, I want more low risk, stuff like that. And what they did was, while this was a new system, it was built on top of, let me get the screenshot here, of their prison management system, which that was also built on top of the economy system. What they did was you use that UI to determine what kind of prisons you want, and when the money system was implemented, or this was tied to the economy, to give it more or to flesh it out. So while these systems may be separate from each other, they're still being connected back and forth through the mechanics. And again, the beauty of this kind of development is if there's an issue, they know exactly where it's coming from. It's going to be from the new system that was added that month. But let's wrap things up here, and I want to talk about this idea for a new video. I was thinking about doing something like almost a dissecting design. Think of it as a cross between an examination and a critical thought, focus on a specific game. So this wouldn't be playing the game as it is breaking it down, talking about the controls, why these mechanics work. There'll be probably very little music. Again, it'll be more focused on breaking the game down rather than playing it. And this will probably not be like a daily video. This will actually take some thought to pick what games to look at and then making something to go along with it. It'll probably be longer than these critical thoughts, maybe 40-50 minutes. But I think this could be another way of adding more content to the channel and making it more unique compared to other people. Because again, we would be breaking down these games rather than playing them. And Prison Architect would certainly be a good case study after today's critical thought. But to wrap things up here, this kind of layered approach is a good way of building on multiple systems. And again, it all hinges on getting your core gameplay loop. Once that is settled, you cannot change it. Just like with this layered approach, if I'm this far away, if I can get my hands right on the thing, this is the problem with looking at it through a reflection. If this is all done, then this cannot be adjusted. Once you've locked that down, you cannot go back over it, because any changes you make to those lower systems will work their way back up to what you're currently working on. And while this approach can be a little bit slower by the fact that you're going system by system instead of designing everything, again, this big ball of mechanics, it is easier and it is safer when you're building untested game mechanics and everything has to work in line. It's almost like one of those pocket watches when you open it up and there's all these different parts working in sync to perform one simple task. And that is the beauty and the allure of multi-system design. But let's wrap it up here. As always, thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. If you're enjoying things, be sure to like and subscribe, and suggest your own critical thought for the future. Let me know what you think about this Dissecting Design game idea in the comments below. But otherwise, I'm Josh Beiser from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Be sure to check back daily for more great content, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBeiser for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBeiser for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.